acceptance speech as I grew nervous over the whole thing. She smiled brightly as I opened the door, hastily reaching to remove the brown paper bag from her arms. She wore her hair natural today, which I liked, because my girl was naturally beautiful. I stepped aside to let her enter, smiling at her as she passed me wearing a brown sweater that made her eyes sparkle. I rolled my fucking eyes as I kicked the door shut. Brown sweater that made her eyes sparkle. I mentally mocked myself as I led her towards the kitchen. I wasn't lying when I said it was clean and virginal. I think the only thing ever cooked on the stove was hot dogs. And I use the term cook very fucking loosely. When we entered the kitchen, I implored her to work as if the kitchen was her own. No need for my girl to feel all fucking uncomfortable going through our shit all evening. She was already going out of her way enough. I deposited the brown bag onto the counter, and jumped up on top of it, leaning back against the cabinets, and glancing in the bag curiously as my girl inspected the room with pursed lips, likely searching for pans, or some shit. She was being a little extravagant with the meal. Steaks, potatoes, corn, and bread. I watched her in much interest as she began unloading the bag, and preparing the steaks. She worked through the kitchen fluidly, as if she already knew where everything was located. I just leaned my head back against the cabinets behind me with my hands stuffed in my pockets, studying her as she worked on the meal. She always did the cutest shit when she was cooking. Little things like pursing her lips when she was cutting vegetables, or the way she mindlessly hummed whenever she stirred something in a pot. Eventually, I grew tired of just watching her work, and I wanted to help. Which did not go well. I had to fucking beg her to let me do the bread. I can't possibly fuck up bread, Bella. I sighed in exasperation as she cradled the large loaf in her arms like I was trying to murder her firstborn, or some shit. She bit her lip and eyed me where I sat on the counter skeptically. I rolled my eyes as she hesitantly handed over the loaf and a knife to cut it with. I smirked, jumping down from the counter, and placing the loaf on the cutting board. She watched anxiously as I began slicing the bread with furrowed brows. It's a lot fucking harder than it looks. I mashed the bread with the first cut, pursing my lips at it and trying again. I watched in much amusement as she fucking cringed with every cut I made. I didn't get 3 slices cut before she grimaced, and stopped my hand, gently prying the knife from my grip, and nudging me out of the way with her little hip. She smiled nervously at me as she glanced back down at the cutting board. I snickered, watching her face grow visibly relieved as she saved the loaf of bread from my gruesome assault. Definitely anal retentive in the kitchen. So fucking cute. That was my last attempt at being kitchen helper. But I did set the table. She inspected my work with a tight smile, leaning up to give me a kiss on the cheek as I went to go fetch Daddy C. I felt more than a little indignant when I returned to the dining room and found all the forks had been moved to the opposite sides of the plates. Like it fucking mattered where the forks went. I rolled my eyes and pulled her seat out for her as Daddy C entered the room, followed by Emmett. We had a uselessly long dining room table, so I kept them at one end and Bella and I at the opposite to make her more comfortable. You'd think those 2 motherfuckers had never eaten steak before the way they eyed the beef on the plates in front of them as they took their seats silently. Fucking salivating. I took my place by my girl and kept an eye on her as we all began eating. The beginning of the meal was hardly unpredictable. Carlisle praising her cooking skills, and thanking her profusely for the gesture, while M just grinned at her widely, and began stuffing his face. I would have bitched at him for being rude as hell if I didn't think my girl loved seeing people eat her food like that. The steak really was fucking delicious, but she looked so goddamn tense as she sat rigid in her chair and cut her steak, nodding timidly at Carlisle's generous thanks, and never saying a word. He glanced at me warily as he ate with cautious movements. I just reached my hand up and slid it under her hair, rubbing her neck the same way we did in the cafeteria. And just like then, her whole body visibly relaxed as she sighed and began eating more comfortably.
It's really no problem, Dr. Cullen. I love cooking,
she said quietly as she put her fork into her mouth and smiled at Carlisle. Carlisle's eyes grew wide for a moment as he took a large swallow of his drink and eyed me curiously.
Please, call me Carlisle.
He smiled, putting down his drink and gaping at my girl in a way that made me want to fucking throw my food at him.
Carlisle.
She nodded with a small smile as I stroked her neck and narrowed my eyes at Carlisle. His curiosity was really fucking rude. We all fell silent for a long while as we ate the delicious meal comfortably. Emmett didn't much care for silence.
So, Bella.
He chewed as my thumb glided over Bella's nape softly. She looked up from her plate and smiled at him a little as he took a swallow from his drink.
I loved your cookies today.
He winked. Fucking winked. I fought back a glower as I popped the fork into my mouth. Not liking any other motherfucker winking at my girl and feeling utterly ridiculous for reacting that way with someone like Emmett. She just smiled at him and muttered a small thanks, blushing. He grinned back at her as Carlisle watched the exchange.
So, you like unicorns?
He asked, basically making me stifle my snickers through my napkin, as my soft caress on her neck faltered momentarily. I was expecting her to blush more, or maybe choke on her food as she swallowed. But she surprised me yet again. She fucking smirked.
Very much so.
She slid the fork into her mouth as I fought back a cough and took a large gulp of my drink. I couldn't fucking help it. Someone gave her one recently. I grinned, setting my glass down and glancing sideways at her as she chewed, still biting back the massive snicker building in my chest. She smiled at Emmett as he attempted to remain interested in a conversation regarding something as fucking stupid as unicorns and shrugged casually.
To actually.
She replied sweetly as she speared a piece of steak. I raised my eyebrows at this really fucking particularly intriguing piece of information. Is that a fact? I asked incredulously. She turned to face me then, reminding me that I was supposed to be stroking her neck, and nodded with a timid smile, still blushing a little. We turned back to our plates as Em and Daddy C glanced at us confused. I smirked down at my steak. Fucking smug all over again.